Hi, my name is Robbie Raineys, and today I will be presenting my military future scanning presentation on the past, present, and future of the U.S. Army Infantry. This presentation is for Entrepreneurship 301. Within this presentation, we'll be looking at the past, present, and future of the Army. Within each section, we will go into the history of American wars, recruitment, eligibility and training, infantry weapons and transportation, and the future of the military. So the U.S. military came about on June 17, 1775 during the American Revolution with our first formal fighting force, the Continental Army. The Revolution was fought from 1775 until 1783 with George Washington in command. Following the American Revolution, we had the Mexican-American War in 1847. After that was the Civil War, which was fought from April 1861 until April 1865. The Spanish-American War fought in 1898. World War I from 1914 until 1919. World War II from 1941 until 1945. The Korean War from 1950 until 1953. The Vietnam War from 1965 until 1973. The Gulf War from 1990 to 1991. The war in Iraq from 2003 until 2011, and the war in Afghanistan from 2001 until 2021. Recruiting, eligibility, and training in the past. During the American Revolution, the official enlistment age was 16 to 55 years old and 15 with a parent's consent. For the Civil War, all men ages 20 to 45 were required to enlist in the draft, yet there were ways to get out of service and many men would utilize these. Moving into World War I, after only 70,000 troops volunteered for combat with a targeted 1 million troops, this led to the Selective Service Act of 1917. The act established a liability for military service of all male citizens, authorized the selective draft of all those between 21 and 31 years of age, and prohibited all forms of bounties, substitutions, or purchase of exemption. Administration was entrusted to local boards composed of leading civilians in each community. These boards issued draft calls in order of numbers drawn in a national lottery and determined exemptions. Then, moving into World War II, President Roosevelt's signing of the Selective Training and Service Act on September 16, 1940, created the first war training scene in the United States. The act allowed for the training of 900,000 soldiers at any time and capped a soldier's service time at 12 months unless Congress deemed it necessary for them to serve longer. This quickly changed after the attacks on Pearl Harbor, and the selective system moved away from the lottery to recruit men and instead moved to administrative selection in each of its 6,000 local boards. During the Korean War, 1.5 million soldiers were indicted and another 1.3 million volunteered. And in the Vietnam War, from a pool of approximately 27 million, the draft raised 2,215,000 men. Moving into recruiting, eligibility, and training of the present, the draft system was put to rest in the 1990s at the start of the Iraq War and is still not in effect today. However, if a war was to erupt, Congress could still vote to use the selective service, bringing the draft back into the picture. Moving into the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, during the Iraq War, there were over 235,000 ground troops deployed. In the Afghanistan War, we reached numbers up to 775,000 ground troops deployed. But recruiting in the last 20 years has not been easy, according to the military. In 2022, it was reported that the Army had only met 40% of its enlistment recruiting mission with only 3 months remaining in the fiscal year. Dually, in 2022, the Air Force was looking to recruit almost 100 times that of the Army, which is around 50,000 airmen. And as of October of 2022, the Air Force was around 4,000 under their goal for airmen enlisted. The Navy seems to be the only branch making close to full progress, with around 89% of their goal enlistment being filled. The Army has reached out to using perks that heavily favor young individuals joining the military. For example, as of right now, the U.S. Army has a $50,000 sign-on bonus for infantry troops. With their training, each soldier goes through basic training as well as a specialty training depending on their position and duty. This enables our military to be staffed with individuals that are the very best at their recruiting, eligibility, and training of the future will look much different than that of the past. Moving forward, we could see some changes in recruiting tactics. As said, only 40% of the 2022 capacity was reached. Because of this, talk of adding women to the selective service system has also come about as a means to fill these extra spots in the case of a military emergency. With training of the future will look much different, as many military positions will require more mental training than physical training. The style of warfare present is quickly changing, and technology's role continues to grow. With that said, as weapons, tactics, and equipment continue to progress, there will be a large rise in technical training rather than physical training. Now, with uniforms, we see great changes from war to war. So starting from the Revolutionary War, in 1779, George Washington ordered that uniforms for soldiers in the Continental Army consist of blue coats, while white waistcoats and facings of various colors. So depending on what branch you were in, you would have different buttons on your coats. In 1782, blue coats with red facings became the standard uniform for all regiments and personnel except generals and staff officers. During this time, we also see the three-point hat being used as the official headwear for the Revolutionary War. Moving into the Civil War, the United States controlled the factories and had massive industrial capacity, which was able to produce high-quality wool uniforms for all of their troops. United States troops looked like soldiers. They all looked the same and were outfitted very well. One of the most recognizable Union uniforms were worn by the Zouaves. Their uniforms consisted of a red cap and bright red pants. During this time, each soldier was equipped with a canteen to hold water, a knapsack to hold spare clothes, personal items in a tent, as well as a haversack which was used to store food. The Civil War was also the era of the Hardie hat. Soldiers on both the Union and Confederate side wore wool Hardie hats draped in the colors of their side. These hats, again, served no protective purpose, but were part of the required uniform. During the Spanish-American War, soldiers were equipped with many of the same necessities as their proprietors in the Civil War. In fact, equipment such as canteens, haversacks, and more were actually taken out of stock from the Civil War and used during the Spanish-American War. Headwear during the Spanish-American War was the campaign hat. This change was made because of the dreaded heat troops were facing during the war. Having a round-billed, more sturdy hat helped to keep them shaded in the heat. Moving into World War I, an infantryman in the U.S. Army was referred to as a doughboy. The name was actually given during the Spanish-American War, with Mexico had just concluded in 1916 when marching foot soldiers in Pershing's expeditionary force traveled south of the border to fight rebel Pancho Villa. Covered in white adobe dust, the foot soldiers were called adobes or dobies by mountain troops. Within a few months, these dobies or doughboys were redeployed to Europe. At this time, attention to detail began to rise. A doughboy's uniform consisted of socks, long underwear, a pullover shirt, breeches or trousers, and a tunic with high collar at the neck. The uniform could be made of cotton or wool. The doughboy's ammunition belt carried 10 pockets, each with 10 rounds of rifle ammunition. Also hung from the belt would be a canteen, cup and carrier, first aid kit, and a trench knife. In their pack, soldiers were supposed to carry a mess kit, toiletries, extra socks and long johns, tent pieces, emergency rations, an entrenching tool such as a spade, and many other items. When the doughboys first began preparation in the U.S., they wore canvas leggings, but those who went over there wore wool spiral wrap pooties. Eventually, all infantrymen adopted this style. At the start of the war, campaign hats were still worn by many American soldiers, but as the war progressed, so did the use of overseas caps. They were easier to carry and fold and fit in better with the Allied troops. During battle, however, the Brodie hat was worn. Brodie helmets were steel helmets with a leather inside to help it fit to the soldier's head. Moving into World War II, much like the changes we saw during World War I, World War II also developed their gear to better support the troops. In World War II, the first waterproof bag, known as their combat pack, was given to infantrymen. Within their combat pack, soldiers could carry personal belongings, toiletries, spare clothes, and personal belongings. Soldiers were also given a first aid kit, which included just 2 battle dressings to help mitigate a hemorrhage, a cartridge belt that held 8 rounds of ammunition and was equipped with small metal holes that the soldier could hang other necessities from, a canteen cover with a canteen cup and mess kit, and lastly an e-tool. Soldiers were also equipped with a cargo pack, which included half of a tent pins, and a blanket. However, most settled for just carrying a raincoat instead of adding the extra weight. Helmets during World War II made significant improvements as well. Unlike Bodie helmets, which just used leather on the inside, the average World War II helmet was comprised of a plastic liner and a steel shell. The liner helped the helmet fit on a troop's head properly, and of course, the steel shell offered the troops some protection from incoming shrapnel. Moving into the Korean War. During the Korean War, some small changes were made to the equipment of World War II to better suit the land. The color of the equipment was changed to olive drab, which helped keep the soldiers more camouflaged from the enemy. Furthermore, soldiers' combat packs were made shorter and wider rather than longer as they had been made in the past. This was done to keep the weight of their gear more compact and allow for easier mobility. During the Vietnam War, uniforms were made much thinner and lighter to accommodate for the heat. A fatigue shirt was typically worn underneath a jungle jacket. Both layers were made of cotton and allowed for the best breathability. Trousers were also equipped with more pockets to limit how much gear a soldier had to carry in their pack. Perhaps the biggest change we see during the Vietnam War are the upgrades made to the helmet. During this time, the inside of the soldier's helmet was made by nylon webbing, usually wrapped in leather, that could be adjusted to better fit the soldier's head. There was also the addition of nape straps, which could be added to helmets to better keep them sitting on the crown of the head. Another breakthrough was the use of liner webbing on the outside of the helmet. Liner webbing was added to the outside of helmets to help them better blend with their surroundings. Colors could change by season depending on what camouflaged best. Lastly, helmets were equipped with an elastic helmet band that would sit on the outside of the helmet and allow for foliage to be placed inside of it to better match the surroundings. Now, moving into the Iraq War and war in Afghanistan. The standard uniform of a soldier deploying Operation Iraqi Freedom in the mid-2000s consists of the Army Combat Uniform, or ACU. This includes coat and pants, tan t-shirt, rigger's belt, tan combat boots, socks, and patrol or boonie cap when on post. The ACU coat and pants are made from a 50-50 nylon cotton ripstop material. The pockets and patches are secured with a hook and pile material instead of buttons like their predecessors. The original camo pattern is known as universal camo, which is digitalized with shades of green, tan, and gray. The Interceptor body armor, IBA, was introduced in the late 1990s and was used until the late 2000s. This bullet-resistant vest features front and back protective plates originally, and later side plates were added along with neck, shoulder, and groin protective pads. With all these attachments, the vest only weighs about 33 pounds. The vest is also designed to carry equipment. This allows the soldiers to attach their first aid, ammo pouches, and other necessities to the vest. Helmets also got a new makeover during the war in Iraq. The Advanced Combat Helmet introduction in the early 2000s and is still used today. The helmet was designed so that night vision optics could easily be attached to the front-mounted plate. Unit insignias were often worn on the side of the helmets, and a green band with infrared reflective materials, cat eyes, can be seen from behind. Soldiers would often have their battle roster numbers sewn into their green band. Attachments such as flashlights and infrared beacons could be attached to the side of the helmet as well. Now, we will take a look at the progression of infantry weapons from the American Revolution up until Iran and Afghanistan. Starting with the American Revolution, the most used weapons were hand grenades, bayonets, and swords, tomahawks, and muskets. The brown bass, or long powder musket, was also introduced in this time and was more favored than muskets before it because it shot a smaller 1-ounce ball. Moving into the Civil War, despite advancements in technology, the arsenal in both the Union and Confederates were still mostly stocked with the old-style smooth-bore muskets.